Wait, what about Uncle Sean?
No, I'll go get him.
No, he said no.
Nobody bothered because he's meditating.
Oh, okay.
All right, well, that's what the film's for.
All right. Now, so you just want me to kind of go over some of the broad strokes of...
Yeah, so I've talked about permaculture and stuff, but I'm not an expert presenter, and they're interested enough to come out here and hear you today.
Okay.
But really, they don't have much of a
We want to
understanding
know
or
about the
introduction.
setups and the benefits and the cons and
Sure.
be better for the ranch.
And you know,
Right.
And obviously the fodder trees are fascinating. I mean, like I don't know how much you want to do, how much you want to wind yourself initially, but Angela just bought 3 acres.
Uh-huh.
And it's heavily wooded, but they want to get goats and things. And I told them about the fodder trees and things.
Okay, cool.
And she's a plant fanatic.
Okay. Yeah.
Both of us.
Okay, so basically, when we're talking about any kind of a system, whether that is just your household finances, if you're bringing in a paycheck, I don't know, we're just going to make up numbers. We're making $1,000 a month, or let's say $500 a week is my paycheck. I'm bringing in $500 a week. I'm clearing it, and that's what I'm bringing home. If every Friday I get paid, and every Saturday I spend $500. I don't have anything for the rest of the week, right? So I'm tight the rest of the week. So that would be kind of an example of, living paycheck to paycheck. That's what most farms and ranches do too. They will either pre-sell, so they're working the whole year on debt, and if something goes wrong, they're in a really tight spot, right? So if you are borrowing money to pay all your bills for the whole week and something goes wrong with your work or whatever and you don't get to work 2 of those days, then your paycheck's not going to be as big and you're going to keep getting further and further and further behind. Or let's say we're farming, we're ranching, right? And we're taking off of the land, we're putting cattle on there and they're eating, and we're not being careful about how much they eat, and they eat the grass down too much, and they might kill it or stunt it a little bit. I don't know, if you ever mow a lawn, if you accidentally set that mowing deck too low and it just takes it down to the dirt, it takes a long time for that grass to regrow and get thick again, right? But if you set that mow deck high, then it just takes the top off, and we take maybe half of the leaves off, then the grass stays green and stays thick, right? So, so if we're constantly putting that cattle on the pasture and just knocking it down to dirt, then that's kind of like taking that lawnmower and just knocking it down to dirt. That's not good for the grass. And if it's not good for the grass, then it's not good for the cows. And you won't be able to keep as many cattle on as many acres. I don't know if y'all are familiar with stocking densities, cows per acre.
So how much will be the cow be in a plant to be able to keep it? What, 2 inches?
It all depends. There's so many different factors I can't say.
Cows don't eat dirt.
Yeah,
So-
cows don't eat dirt. So our goal is
They
to
don't
get...
eat per acre, they eat per grass.
Right. So it depends on how much rain, how much fertility is in the soil, how healthy the grass is, how much it was chewed down the last time. There's so many different factors that play that will determine how hard you can graze that, or how many cows you can graze it for how many days. There's lots and lots of variables changing all the time, little details changing all the time. So our goal is to move away from a poorly managed system where those cattle are just knocking it all the way down to moving them quick across the land, just like they would move in the wild, just like bison would or deer would. Deer will just pass through real quick. They'll take a little bit, and then they'll go on. And then those plants regrow faster, right? And so if we were putting that cattle on and just taking all the grass, and then we sell the cattle and we don't put anything back, what happens to all the minerals? If the plants are taking up nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium and we're not putting that back in, and we're always taking it away, that would be like every time your kid is going off to school with the lunch and he takes a fork from the drawer, and then he doesn't come home with a fork. You're not going to have any more forks, right? And we'll see the same thing with some of the minerals in our soil, right? So some of those minerals are just tiny, tiny, tiny amounts. But if we don't have it, then the animals will get sick, right? So cobalt is one of those that is essential for metabolic cellular energy function. Your mitochondria use cobalt in just tiny, tiny, tiny amount. But are they going to have what they need if it's not in the ground? And your cows are eating the grass and there's no cobalt or selenium or molybdenum. Some of these elements are just tiny, tiny amounts. And we can go through and we can add that to their minerals, or we can add it to a compost and let microorganisms eat it and make it more plant available, ready and quick for the plants to take it up. And then we can spread that on our pastures and we can put all of the cobalt that they need back in the ground, and now the grass can grow faster, can grow bigger leaves, more protein. And if we fix that, then
In the soil, I'm sorry to interrupt, in the soil, to be able to make it compost-like, how is the rotation on how we'll be able to make it more fertile?
So
put cows in there and then other animals, yes.
So instead of like having a manure spreader or a sprayer that's going to spray triple 13 on the pasture to make it grow faster, we would have, it's basically just a tank of water, and you put this compost in it and it runs water through it and just rinses it through and basically makes a little mud slurry, and then that just gets sprayed on the ground. Okay. And that puts the microorganisms and the minerals back in the soil and helps bump that up. I can show y'all pictures of this style of compost tea spreading on your pasture is called the BEAM method, B-E-A-M, and it was kind of developed by Dr. David Johnson out of University of California, I think, Chico? Doesn't matter. And they have lots of pilot programs with different farmers, and there's a really, really cool example. Before I tell you that example, I want to talk about trees real quick so that you understand. Trees, their circulation system, they don't have blood like we do. If I were to put some kind of medicine in this arm, it would go throughout my whole body, right? Because my blood is taken all through my whole body. Right. If we put some medicine on one root, this root of the tree, it's not going to go in this root. It's just going to go up to the branches that are connected to it. It's like little pipes all the way up, and the roots on this side take little pipes up to the branches on that side, okay? So that's important to understand, because this farmer was spraying that compost tea on the field. And let's say this is a chestnut tree. He was spraying, going back and forth, spraying the compost tea, and he got to this tree and he sprayed underneath the tree. Here's the tree branches. He sprayed underneath, and he got over there and ran out. And then maybe some rain was coming, or he had to go do something, but he ran out and he didn't have time to come back and finish spraying the whole field, okay? All of the branches from this side over
They were healthy and beautiful.
The leaves were like 3 or 4 times as big. The nuts on that side, the burrs of the chestnuts were like this big, and the chestnuts on this side were like this big. The only difference was a little bit of that compost.
Now, you're saying, so you could just give a mineral block to your animals, but it's more bioavailable if
Yes.
it goes through the microorganisms into the plants.
Right. So what we're looking for is not necessarily healthier cattle, because we could just make sure that the cattle get a feed ration or some mineral blocks where they could get those elements that they need. But that's not going to fix the whole system, right? It would be like saying, I've got a whole house that needs remodeled and needs fixed. The roof is leaking, the bathroom is caving in, the plumbing doesn't work.
Close to home.
Well, I try to use examples that work. Yeah. There's all these different problems that need fixed. And we say, well, we're just going to remodel the bathroom and then everything will be fine. Well, you can use the bathroom now. You can take a shower, but rain's coming in and drywall's falling off and there's mold and you're not going to be healthy because the whole thing isn't fixed. And so what we want to do is not just make sure we have healthy cows, we want to fix everything. And so we want to get the soil healthy. And you don't have to do the whole thing all at once. You can do a little patch here, and then the next year do a little patch, and then the next year do a little patch, and you keep doing that. And if you're fixing the mineral problem at the same time as fixing the soil fertility problem with the compost, I mean, just doing the compost is fantastic.
So how would you well, you're saying that we need to make tea out of the compost. So do you have a special tubing, or do you treat it as...
It's super simple. Very, very easy. It's basically a big tank, and there's a basket in it with a strainer, and you put the compost in there, and there's a pump that pumps water from the tank through the strainer, and it just rinses all the good stuff out of that compost.
You keep piling compost on it?
Yep. So you'll just rinse it out, and then you'll take that tank, and it's constantly pumping it and mixing it, just like any kind of a pump with herbicides in it. If you're spraying your pastures, you'd use the same kind of thing, and it's just got dribblers where it's just dripping the water out, or spraying. Yeah. Any number of applicators you could put on the back of a pickup truck, on a tractor, anything like that, and it just rinses. And then once you empty that tank, you go dump what's left over of that compost out. Put another.
It never kind of seeps through that basket ever. Like as something maybe like
It's
eventually.
very small
Does
particles.
that usually cause buildup in the tank that you eventually maybe once a year have to clean or you know.
But
I'm sure you have to,
normally they'll have a like a sprayer inside that's constantly mixing it and keeping everything in
So
suspension.
it's not building up on walls
Yeah.
and stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
I got a question, I'm sorry.
I'm just curious about the formula, if it has to be specific to your soil and your environment,
So-
or do you have a compost formula that's general that you can start with?
So I'm mixing two things together because we're in permaculture design stuff. We try to stack functions. We try to stack as many things together so that one action takes care of multiple problems, right? So we don't just drive to town to go grocery shopping. We make a list and we go to town and we get groceries, we stop by the hardware store, we do all these little things so that the gas that we burn going there is used 4 or 5 different ways, so we spend less money, less time, less effort. Time is money, your effort is money, money is...
You want it to run efficiently
Yes.
where it's not costing time and like you said effort.
Yeah. So instead of, I mean, if you were just doing the beam compost system, that would be fantastic. But we can, David doesn't really talk about this stuff, but I think it's really important, and most people don't realize how important it is and how cheap it is for the effects that it'll have.
That makes sense to me, and you need to feed the minerals to the
Right.
to the ground.
Well, it's
for it to provide what it needs for everything
right.
else.
So this is what I like to illustrate it this way is, you know, a lot of my clients are concerned about the food system collapsing and not being able to get groceries, and so we want to be able to grow our own food, right? We want to be able to support our families. So if we are raising all of our own food on our land, and let's say, okay, here's our land. We're raising all of our food and we're eating from this land only. We're not getting stuff from other parts of the country. Right now, we get stuff from California, from Oregon, from Mexico, from Chile. I mean, all over the world, right? And we're getting all these different minerals that are all over the world. And I mean, we might get some stuff that's deficient in selenium from California, but we get some stuff from Argentina that is rich in selenium maybe, right? So we're still getting some selenium. But if your ground has almost no detectable selenium, and that's where you're getting all your food from, do you have enough selenium in your body now? No. What about your kids? Well, what if you need that mineral and your kids don't get it for 10 years? There's going to be health problems down the road, right? And so I just did my whole garden space and brought all of those micronutrients up to a level that they need to be. And the rate that it's going to get used from just my gardening, I don't have to put more of those minerals on there for 10, maybe 20 years. So it's a one-time thing. And then maybe 5 years from now, I might need a little bit more, but it's pretty cheap. And so if we're already doing that compost system to improve the pasture so we can run twice as many cows, right? Then we might as well take those minerals and put them in that compost so that we're spreading the minerals and the biological stuff at the same time. And then we're doing double duty, we're getting twice as much done, and then what happens is those plants will be healthier. And when those plants are healthier, they're going to grow faster. They're going to make more protein. So our pasture might look the same, but the leaves might have 5, 10, 15% more protein in them. Right. Because they're healthier. Well, that means conceivably we ought to be able to have 5, 10, 15% heavier stocking density to get the same pounds of beef off of that land, right?
Oh, yeah, because you're making healthier cows at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
So the cows, and then there's a whole bunch of downstream effects too. Yeah. So let's say the cows are getting the minerals that they need in a cow form that they're designed to take it in. And so those cows might need less medical intervention. So those cows might get sick less. They might have less hoof problems or whatever. And so instead of having, maybe every year out of 500 cows, we have 5 cows just drop dead because they got sick. Well, what if the next year we don't have 5 cows drop dead? Well, 5 cows, if each cow is worth $1,500 at the sale barn, I mean, that's money we're talking about, right?
Right.
So if we spend, $10,000 on minerals to improve 100 acres, 200 acres, and it saves us $10,000 worth of losses for 20 years?
Yeah, that's a lot of money.
It snowballs, right? And so that's what we want to do. We want to start that cascade of good effects. We want to snowball those good effects. So instead of living paycheck to paycheck with our ranch, what we want to do is we start saving a little bit of money until we've got a whole paycheck set aside, right? And then if something pops up, hey, I need to deal with this, I've got a whole month's worth of money set aside. Yeah. And I can just deal with that and it won't set me back.
or a whole decade of fertility.
Right. So instead of mining that soil and taking out and taking out and taking out, we're actually going to put some more in and we're going to reinvest.
I kind of have a side question.
Sure.
It's a bit of a science. Well, you know how with pollen, depending on the pollen area, it helps with your allergies?
Mm-hmm.
Can minerals kind of do the same thing? Like, not like help with allergies specifically, but if you were getting specific minerals to that area, does
Mm-hmm.
that kind of give you certain immunities to maybe things in the area?
You like taking vitamins
Kind of
without
like
taking pills.
No, I would say
is that
it's
kinda
just going to make you
universal?
healthier.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So here's an example. There's for many years, all of the big top agronomists, scientists said, silicon is not really important to plants. They use it, but it's not really that important. Well, Rutgers University in New Jersey, New Jersey has really silicon deficient soils. So they did a test. They took the same dirt and they filled 200 pots with the same dirt. In 100 of the pots, they put more silicon, and they brought that level up to a good, healthy level. They took the same batch of seed, squash plants, and they put 100 plants in each. Same water, watered both of them, same light. They're sitting side by side,
Right.
literally side by side. All of the ones with the silicon deficient soil, almost all of them, like 98%, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but almost all of them got powdery mildew. And that's a problem with squash and cucumber plants, lots of those will get powdery mildew real bad. And it cuts down on yield.
Yeah.
It may not kill the plant outright, but it's going to cut down on how many pounds of squash you get out of it, right? The silicon-enriched soils had almost zero powdery mildew.
And production-wise, twice probably is not.
I don't know on production numbers, but I know those plants were healthier. Cut and dried, clear. They were healthier. So it may not make them immune to diseases, but my belief is that if your body has all of the tools it needs, all of the minerals, all of the vitamins, all of the stuff that it needs to run optimally, it's going to be healthier. You're going to feel better. You're going to look better. All of those little systems in your body are going to function the way that they're designed to function if you're getting all the stuff that you need. It's like trying to make pico and you don't have tomatoes. That's not pico, right? Or right? Or you've got tomatoes and onions, but you don't have cilantro. That would just be sad, right? It's just not going to work right. It's not going to be the same. So yeah. So we want to make sure that we are giving our plants all of the minerals, all of the tools they need to build healthy leaves so that our
It's healthy food for the
animals can get a healthy amount of food. Now, one of the other things I like to always do and always think about is I always try to plan for the worst and hope for the best, right? So if I'm planning for the worst, then I need to think about, okay, how can I feed my cows? If I am building a business, if I'm setting up my ranch, my farm, with built into it, I have to go to the feed store and I have to buy 20 tons of grain every year. Or else everything breaks. My cows die because they don't have enough food. Then I have designed a business, I've designed my ranch on absolutely needing to go to the feed store. What happens if the feed store doesn't have the feed I need?
The cows die.
The cows die. My system that I built breaks. And I don't want to do that. So I want to design into it as much independence from the feed store as I can. Now, there's a couple reasons. If something goes wrong and I can still feed my cattle, great.
I have food to eat too.
Right? I still have food to eat. if something goes wrong regionally and everybody has to cull their herds but me,
They're
Oh,
gonna
yeah,
come to
then
you
you're
and
the-
make
what's going to happen next year?
Yeah.
Who's going to have all of the breeding stock?
Right, you will. So you'll be the main source.
That's right.
But you'll be-
And then
you'll
what's
make
going to
money while
happen?
everyone else ain't making money.
Exactly. And so you'll be in a position where you can just jump on that and be the big dog, right? So that's if something goes wrong regionally. Let's think about if everything goes right, and I have planted fodder trees, like you brought that up. I think it's so important going forward. Whether things go bad or things go great, if I have acreage blocks of fodder trees planted, really easy to manage. Every winter, you just take your tractor and a bush hog and you just mow it down. You just chop it all down to the ground, and it leaves a stump, and then the spring, they regrow. Okay? That's what these trees do.
Oh, cool.
Okay? So if I have a 5-acre plot filled with white mulberry that I do that with, and then I've got however many cattle, and they need some extra protein, let them in there, and they just strip all the leaves off, most of the leaves off, and then we get them out. Those trees will put out more leaves, and then maybe 3-4 months down the road, when the pasture is a little bit down, we need more protein, put them back in there, and they eat those leaves and get the mulberry leaves typically have 20 to 30% protein. You know those range tubs, only like 16% protein? You want your feed to be around 12 to 16% protein? 30% protein, that means my grass can be bad, and I can still have them up at a really good protein content, and I can still be putting weight on those cattle with those trees. And so if times are good and I don't have $50,000 that I'm dumping in my time and my effort, that money is a symbol for days and hours and years of your life, right? So if we can hold on to that, then we get more wealthy, right? So I don't think of wealth as, how many dollars do I have available to just throw away? I think of wealth as how many hours of my life do I not have to give to be happy and keep living life, right? So if I can keep those dollars in my control, and I keep, every year I'm putting another $50,000 in my control, 50,000, 50,000, 50,000, 50,000, instead of that leaving my control and going to a feed store, I'm holding on to that. That means I'm snowballing how much money, how much time, how much effort I've kept, right? And so, if we can improve our stocking density by getting rid of some of the pasture land, but I can end up tripling how many cows I can put on the whole property because I have a third of it devoted to fodder trees, for instance. Well, how much more money if we're still buying feed the same amount? Well, what if we just cut our herd down however much, and now we don't have to buy any feed, and now we get to hang on to all that money, and we're still bringing in the same amount, but we cut our expenses down by 50 grand a year? That adds up.
Well, you still make money off the cows you get rid of too, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
So,
Never lose.
right,
For the
yeah,
most part.
right. So yeah. So that's what I try to do is I try to think if the worst case scenario happens and everything just goes to heck, we're going into a Great Depression in America. Can I still feed my family and can we be healthy? Right? I don't want to have to rely on this land and there's not enough calcium and our teeth start getting loose and our bones are brittle and my kids are playing, and because their bones are brittle, they get a broken bone, right? I don't want that to happen, so I want to make sure everything that we're bringing off of this is going to be good, healthy food so that we can feed our families good, healthy food. And then not only that, that's great just in and of itself. But if that cuts down on our vet bills and other things that we have to buy from off the farm to keep the animals healthy, then we're cutting our losses, right?
So how do you test the ground to be able to be level? Because you
Good
put
question.
The calcium as an example. But if you exceed the calcium, you also can harden it your bones and make it.
Absolutely.
To the-
Yes.
So,
So definitely, we don't want to just put stuff out there, because if we get magnesium too high in the soil,
Yeah,
it will
you
bind
get
up the
too
calcium. and then the calcium there might be enough calcium, but it's locked up.
right.
And so the plants can't get to it because it's locked up. So I like to tell people to go to Logan Labs. You take soil samples and you send them off to Logan Labs. Now, if you have 400 acres, you're not just going to take soil sample from one spot.
Do you have ways that you can test it in here? Like if you say it goes great and everything goes wrong, how will you be able to take care of that specific thing?
Oh, if Logan Labs goes out of business?
Well, if everything goes,
If everything goes sideways,
Yeah.
you can't.
you wouldn't be able to know.
No, you won't know. That's why I say find out now and start fixing it now.
Right.
When things are good, start fixing it now, so that if things go bad, you know at least, hey, we got halfway
Okay.
to where we needed to be. It might take 5 to 10 years to get all those minerals in balance.
But I think what she's saying is even when you get them in balance and then to a certain point can't they just get too high in some area and then you don't know that mineral's too high
That's possible,
and then it's like
but it's not probable.
Yeah.
It's not very likely.
Okay, it's not likely you'll have too much of something once you get it balanced.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, it can happen, but most of these systems change very slowly. They change very slowly over time, and it's unless you're adding something, unless you're spreading calcium out there,
So learn it.
it's not
right
going
the
to.
first time. That way you don't have to guess.
Right.
around.
It's not very likely that you're going to see calcium levels going up and up and up unless you're putting calcium out there.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So if you check it, and there's across the board, yep, magnesium levels are pretty high. Make sure you're not adding magnesium sources. We just take out anything that might add more magnesium. We might need a little bit more calcium, or you're probably not going to need any more calcium out here. But you might need more phosphorus. You might need more potassium. Yep. Well, here's the cool
Why
thing.
do you think there's plenty of calcium here? Is it just the area or
These are very calcareous soils.
because of the limestone?
Yes. That's
why
what
a lot of people
limestone
have
is.
teeth problems in here because of the water they drink, and it has a lot of calcium. The teeth rottens it. It gets really hard, and it starts brittle and getting lost.
Yeah. When those minerals get out of balance, it's not good. So we want to find out, what balance we're at, and then try and manipulate things to bring that more into balance. Yeah. So I would say, start, send off several tests to Logan Labs. It's $30 for the test. And then you'll have, I'm sure you have kind of names for your sections, there's the bottom 40 or whatever.
So you could take a map and
Right.
draw, put a layer on it,
Yep.
draw it.
So you might have a 40-acre chunk, and you just go through and you take a whole bunch of core samples off of that whole 40 acres. You might take 20, 40 samples, put them all in a bucket, you mix them all up together, send that off, and that's the bottom 40 or whatever. All right, bottom 40 or plot 12, whatever you want to call it. And you label that and you send that off. Or you might do that with 12 different test spots.
Okay, yeah.
And now you'll have kind of a map, an idea of what things are like. And if they're all fairly the same,
You're fine.
I would just say you mix up one recipe and then one prescription and you start from there and you change it a little bit. And then you test it the next year and see where did it change. And then you'll readdress that and you put more minerals in there. And then the next year you keep doing that until, hey, we got sulfur up where it needs to be. Sulfur's good. We got copper and molybdenum and magnesium and zinc and all these other little elements. The little elements are quick to change. Normally you need like one application and you're good. You might have a little manipulation later, but normally it's just one time and you're pretty well good. It's the bigger elements like calcium and magnesium, phosphorus and potassium. Nitrogen, don't even worry about nitrogen. Okay. Nitrogen almost takes care of itself. It changes so fast and fluctuates so much that I wouldn't even worry about it. There's a lot of plants that will take nitrogen out of the air and put it into the soil.
Okay. So how long you're going to add this to your compost?
Mm-hmm.
How long after you add the minerals to your compost do you let the microorganisms work their magic until you spread it as a tea? Okay,
so this compost system is different than the Berkeley method where you're turning it and it's an aerobic. Mm-hmm. It's a turned system. I've done that. I've done thousands of hours of pitchforking compost and I'm never going to do that again. It's unnecessary and it doesn't get you a quality product as high quality as if you were to set up a static pile that had good airflow with the Johnson Sioux bioreactor style composter.
Now that's the one where you have a big bale and you have tubes in it.
Correct.
And then you pull the tubes out.
Correct. So you'll set those tubes in there and you've got your cage and you'll fill it up and you wait 24 hours and then you pull the tubes out and it leaves air holes all the way through it. And then the air flows through it. And then by the time it's broken down enough that those tubes collapse, you don't need the tubes anymore anyways. You don't need the airflow anyways. Because it's cooled off, it's broken down enough that you just want it to sit there and just kind of slowly rot. And then you get a very fungally dominant compost. And because you're not turning it, you're not breaking apart those mycelium. So that those fungus that we're talking about, their bodies are just threads. And they're like a net of threads.
Like the probiotics that your system needs to be able to have a better digestion body.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yep.
So the fungus creates kind of roots, pathways through,
yes.
And you break those up when you toss.
Correct.
When you turn the.
Yep.
And so
you destroy those.
And so the fungus doesn't grow as well when you do that.
Correct.
But like bacteria use that as like pathways, right?
The bacteria will eat all the stuff that's broken up and decaying. And so you get a very bacterially dominant compost with that Berkeley style where you're turning it, uh-huh. And those bacteria will eat that stuff and off-gas a whole bunch of your nitrogen and a whole bunch of your carbon. And what you'll end up with is sometimes a 50% reduction in mass. You might have a 2 cubic foot pile of compost, and by the time it's done, it's 1 cubic foot.
Because
that's
the bacteria ate it?
Yeah, it just went off into the air. Literally, it just went up in smoke.
Yeah.
And
so the fungus is what you're looking for.
So that fungus, well, I'm looking to not work so much.
Yeah.
So I want to pile all that stuff up.
Everything to work itself.
And you just leave it for a whole year.
So you don't turn your compost?
No. You pile that all up, it's like baking a cake. You don't open that oven door and get in there and start mixing it up, or you're not going to have a good cake.
Well, when I think of compost, I'm thinking you're keeping food scraps and things like that. Are you also including other things?
I'm talking about
accumulate
leaves, hay, wood chips, anything that.
No meats, no lactose or anything.
Yeah, you could put all that in there.
No,
but you don't have. Yes, you can put everything. If it can turn into dirt, put it in there.
She
But
said
basically, if
meat,
it's
so you're putting like,
biodegradable.
Yes,
wow, okay.
I'll compost whole animals.
Yeah, I
Alright.
understand before that the compost it wouldn't be healthier without any protein or lactose, but that's why my question came. That's perfect then.
No.
So
Everything.
milk,
Well, I think we're all surprised.
milk and
Yeah.
meat and.
That's fine.
and stuff.
No,
Not so
No, not
much
plastic.
Yeah.
Everything.
If it can turn into dirt, it can go in there.
Okay.
Paper plates, paper cups, anything that can turn into dirt, make it into dirt.
And
Bones.
so, as you're building the Johnson Sioux bioreactor, you're adding in your minerals. At that point, you let it sit for a year, and then you would make the tea with it to feed
Correct.
your fields.
Yep. And so instead of trying to get a uniform spread on those minerals, we just diluted them into 2, maybe 10 cubic yards of compost material. And it's way more difficult for you to now accidentally put a toxic amount of cobalt in one spot, because you just spread that cobalt out incredibly and diluted it. And then if you accidentally put twice as much compost on one spot, it's not nearly as big of a problem with toxicity issues as if you would accidentally put twice as much of that cobalt right there, because you're not going to get perfectly uniform mix on the stuff. So the more we can dilute it before we apply it, the less likely you're going to accidentally screw up and put a toxic amount. Like some of these ingredients for these mineral mixes, if you were to just take a spoon of it and eat it, it'd kill you. It's poison. But if you spread it out over a whole acre, it's actually good.
Yeah.
It's beneficial, yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about this compost system that you're talking about?
The Johnson Sioux?
Yeah?
I wanted to take some.
Okay, so if you're gonna do this on a bigger scale than, doing the vertical tower things, they actually did in a hoop house where they could control moisture levels, and because we don't want it rained on and have all those nutrients leached out. If you just run hundreds of gallons of water through rain, it's just going to leach out all the nutrients and they're all going to wash away. So we want them to stay in there and then go where we want them to go. So you'd cover that and keep it from getting rained on, and you'd put some irrigation in it to keep it moist, right? So you can do a static pile that's in a hoop house. You got a 30-foot wide by 100-foot long hoop house, and you pile it up in there. And they did a lot more with an easier management system for, bigger amounts of that compost.
So how do they keep the holes in like, are you still putting in the
They still had air
vertical
tubes in there.
pipes?
Yep.
Did
They
take them out?
had pallets or something underneath. I'm
Because if you got a roof over, it'd be harder to pull pipes out.
but it's not a very deep pile.
Uh-huh.
It's only, I think there were about 2 foot
Oh,
deep.
okay. I'm imagining you bringing in a front end loader with your
Mm-hmm.
different stuff.
Yep. So you'd mix up all your materials and you bring it in and you dump it, and I think they were doing it about 2 or 3 feet deep.
Oh, so you're not just throwing it in there as you.
Well, I'm saying there's kind of 2 ways you can do it.
So the ones
If you're doing tons and tons of this stuff,
Right.
I mean dump truck loads of this stuff, because you're doing 400 acres every year, then you can just fill up that hoop house and do one big static pile instead of a whole bunch of those cages.
yeah.
So there's a hoop house.
So you
and
could-
there's a cage system.
So,
Right.
so
Difference.
like
Yeah.
if you take a pallet and you drill little 4-inch hole or round holes in it,
Mm-hmm.
you can put the 4-inch drain pipe in there, and then you can put the different things he was talking about, the leaves and the wood chips and things in there.
Mm-hmm.
And after you're done piling and packing it all in there, you leave it for a couple days. You're wrapped with you wrap it around with wire mesh or something.
And black weed barrier fabric.
So it can be like, you know,
It looks like a big giant sausage.
what is it, like 5 feet, 6 feet tall?
Yeah, they're 6 foot tall.
Okay, so they're 6 foot tall. You pack it all in there, and then once you got it all packed, you let it sit for a couple days. Then you pull those drain tubes out. You know, those drain lines, those 4-inch lines, and that's it.
Do you have to fill it up within a certain time limit?
Yeah, that does.
You just it's like baking a cake. You put it all in, you fill it all up the same day.
Oh, it does have to be filled that same day.
Yeah.
Okay. So in my mind, I'm thinking you're just over time filling this up. That's it. Okay, so
Now you can stockpile materials, but you want to keep them dry
gotcha. Okay.
or static until it's time to start.
To put everything in.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like baking a cake.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the way you want to think about it. We're not gonna mix up all the dry ingredients and start baking it, and then the next day we add some milk and eggs
Okay.
and mix them in there. It's not gonna come out right. We want to mix everything together, mix it all up good, and then we make sure the oven's hot, right? And we stick it in there,
And wait.
and we wait. We don't get in there and start stirring it up. Is it done yet? No, it'll mess it up, right? So we just wait. We just let it go, let it finish, let it do its thing, and then we have a beautiful cake.
You gotta find a lot of heat coming off of this process.
They don't get very hot. They'll go through a heat, and they'll get maybe 140 degrees, but
It's long, short-lived.
yeah, it's very short-lived.
It's not the same thing because it's not too bacteria heavy.
Right.
Which would be producing a lot of the heat.
Right. So there's curves of all the, I mean, there's tens of thousands of different species of creatures in there. And they'll go through a population spike. And once their food source
It's gone.
is gone, they start dying off. And then the next thing will eat the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And then those populations over time will rise and decline and then rise and decline. And then, you know, if you were to test it, you might have almost all of the species by volume is like 1 or 2. And it's really dominant in these couple types of bacteria. But as time goes on, more different creatures come in and reproduce, and then you get more and more and more and more diversity. And you get all these different kinds of bacteria and fungi growing. And I mean, we don't know exactly what bacteria and fungi we need to have in our digestive systems for a healthy gut. We don't know all of the things that the soil needs for a healthy soil system.
So you wait about a year and then you start making the tea from that on.
Correct.
Before you cannot do anything because then you will kill everything that is producing the.
Well, you can, but it's best to wait a year because you get so much more diversity.
Okay.
And then, so if you waited only 6 months, it might be really dominant in a couple of those species, and that might not be what your soil needs. It's better to just let it break down slow, because at the end of it, if you reach in there and you squish it up, there shouldn't be any sticks and leaves and stuff. It should just almost be like clay. Yeah, it should almost feel like clay.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it turns into just, yeah. You know, like that beautiful, beautiful black compost dirt, right?
Yeah.
When it's broken down perfectly, yeah. And like earthworm castings. When there's no sand in little bits, if you were to squish it, earthworm castings that were just food scraps or whatever, it would be almost like clay.
It
would be so smooth.
Clay in here.
Mm-hmm.
So
Hey, red clay is good.
yeah.
Red clay holds on to nutrients really well.
Okay.
Yep. That's nice.
We have one part of the ranch that was left fallow for 10 years.
Yeah, it's probably been 12 by now.
Anyway, and it had, the agricultural people, the government people wanted us to put native plants in, all the native pastures. So it's been left that way.
Mhm.
We haven't planted it, we haven't cut it. It hasn't been cut, has it, Mike?
So they had us mow it every 2 or 3 years.
Okay. But it was never changed from whatever was put in there that was, and basically it's organic now. because it was all just natural.
Sure.
So would you be better off starting with would you have a more balanced, probably because it's all natural, it's all kinds of natural plants that were there? Or would that just be depending on what was planted?
Well, if it's been left alone and not managed with herbicides and stuff and fertilizers, it's probably going to be more balanced. But again, like we're talking about with those minerals, if there's no selenium in that soil, for instance, and it's native plants growing there, but there's no selenium for them to take up, and they can't just make it out of thin air. Is there going to be any more selenium there?
There would
No.
still be some deficiencies there.
Right. So if there's no selenium, we can't just magically, it's there.
So the soil needs to be tested.
So the soil, yeah, regardless of how it's been managed, I would say test it and find out what you're dealing with. Just like, if you have a health problem, I know something's not right. So we do some blood tests and we find out, is there something obviously wrong?
So once you want to be organic, how long do you need to wait for a specific area to be detoxified of the old nutrients or whatever it was put in?
I am not nearly as concerned about being organic.
Okay.
I don't hold to the belief that you have to do everything a certain perfect way. I say, hey, if your cattle need to be dewormed, deworm them. Is that optimal? Is that best? No. But I would much rather see you deworm your cattle and you stay in the green next year than not deworm your cattle because you think it's best to be organic and then you go bankrupt. I would much rather see people keep deworming their cattle, get their soils healthy, start putting in good rotational management with their cattle so they're not standing in their own poop, eating the worms, We put them in there and we get them out and then those worms get to die. Or we're putting...
Chickens to eat the worms.
Right. And then those parasites get in the chickens and they die because that's not a cow and that's not where I live. Right? So those dead end animals. So we can start breaking that cycle and you keep worming your cattle until you get that all healthy and then you stop needing to. And if you don't need to, don't do it. Right? And so eventually it gets healthy again, right? And then we don't have to worm.
So not deworming cows is considered an organic process?
Well, if
Anything you use.
anything that you're putting into your system that is not organic, it's not certified organic, would preclude you from using that term organic.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You can't shoot them for blackleg and you can't shoot them for any other native thing. Anything that might be in the area suddenly and you would need to inoculate the cattle.
Yeah.
If you wanted to keep them organic, you'd have to isolate them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's more expensive, it's more difficult. Now
I don't see how them having worms is organic.
it's if you're putting chemicals in them. If you're putting chemicals in them and, shooting them up with...
Take that into the meat, and that would not be considered
Yeah.
organic. So if they had the worms in the system and you didn't treat them, they might, if you were raising them right, that would naturally probably take care of it.
Yeah.
So if you gave your animal penicillin to get rid of influenza or pneumonia,
Infection.
then that's not organic.
Right.
Because you're
Putting something chemical in.
you're changing the meat, right?
Yeah.
And same thing with the way we typically deworm is we spray a real thick syrup on their backs with ivermectin in it, and that soaks into their skin, and that becomes part of the animal. But it gets rid of the parasites. But there are people who want to pay extra not to have any ivermectin in their beef.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, is it unhealthy for the cows to get ivermectin? I don't know. But again, if we have healthy cattle that don't need it, that means I don't have to buy it.
Cycle, you don't need to be
I don't have to buy it.
Yeah.
I know. I don't have to buy it. I don't have to spend my time putting it on. I don't have to stress the cattle out by putting them through a head chute,
Yeah.
right? So they're happier. I'm spending less money. I'm spending less time.
And if you think about it,
That means
the
I'm happier.
animal's happier when it dies. It's better meat.
Yeah.
Well, what I've heard. Like
Yeah.
Less problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just benefits all around the board. So, I don't aim for Beyond Organic because Beyond Organic is
Almost impossible. in
somehow
Korea.
better. I mean, I do. I'm trying to think of how to say this right. People get really, really wrapped up in pursuing perfection. And if they get excited about it, about gardening, and they're really excited about gardening, and I'm going to do everything organic. But for 10 years, they've been doing everything standard. I've been putting triple 13 out. I've been putting 7 dust on stuff. I've been spraying for this. I've been spraying for that. And then all of a sudden, they decide to just change it like that. That gardening year, they're going to have a bad time because things are not healthy. And then you're not going to get vegetables, and you're going to go hungry. And I don't want to see people think that they have to just turn everything on ahead day one. Start with little changes. Start towards healthy practices.
Yeah.
And then as it makes sense, hey, our cattle are healthy and they're looking great. Let's have the vet, test their poop and see, do they have bad worms? Because if it's just a little bit, I don't care. As long as they're putting on weight good, I don't care. Let them have a little bit of worms. We're rotating them through. That pasture is good and healthy. We have multiple species grazing in there. Now I don't have to spend money on that. And my cattle are healthier. And then eventually, we can get to that uber beyond organic nirvana of we're not putting any synthetic anything into our system, and we're getting good healthy food out. And everyone's healthy and happy.
All because you started off with getting your cows dewormed.
Right. We can keep chasing.
Technically organic.
Yeah, we can keep chasing those problems with drugs, right?
Yeah.
I can take Tylenol for my headache, but I keep drinking 2 12-packs of beer every night, and I keep waking up every morning with a headache. Oh, take some Tylenol. Take some Tylenol. Take some Tylenol every day. Well, how about I have 1 or 2 beers and I drink some water,
To hydrate your body.
and then my headache goes away, right? So that's why I say, don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
There
So
you go.
I'd rather see a little bit of good change now, and then a little bit more next year, and then a little bit more next year.
Until you get
And if you get a setback, and hey, we gotta put ivermectin on all the cattle this year, do it. Don't think that we can't put ivermectin on the cattle because we finally have the manure beetles. Those are great. They'll roll up little balls of manure and they'll dig it into the soil and they start improving your pasture like that, and that's fantastic. But those won't live there if you're using ivermectin, because then the little beetle grubs will eat the manure and there's ivermectin in it and then they die. Right? So it's good to stop using ivermectin, but it's not good to stop using ivermectin if you go bankrupt.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why I say we start with these healthy
Educated
choices.
choices.
Right.
Yeah.
We start with these healthy choices. We start moving it towards healthy, and we start snowballing, and we end up making more money, working less, having healthier food.
And spending less money.
Yeah, and spending less money. Yep. And all those things keep snowballing and snowballing to where eventually we can get to a point where, like we talked about, if worst case scenario, the worst thing happens And let's say, I'm just going to make up numbers. We're running 500 head of cattle and we're buying, 50 tons of grain a year. I don't know numbers. I'm just making stuff up. If worst case scenario happens and you got to get rid of half of your cattle because you can't buy any grain and you can still run 250 head of cattle, whereas everyone else is managing theirs where they have to cut down to 10% of their herds, right? But you only had to cut 50%? Right. You're going to be in a fantastic position.
This is different from what we're on right now, but the fields that you would dedicate towards the white mulberry, is there any danger of doing that monocropping? Like if you...
I wouldn't do one specific species, 5 acres of one species.
You can vary.
You can put a variety of stuff in there. You can have elm and mulberry and hybrid poplar and hybrid willow. You can have tons of different things in there.
And you can mow all of those together in the winter.
Correct.
With your big brush hog.
Correct.
And grow back.
And then I'll come back from the roots.
Yes.
Okay, well that's fantastic.
Yep. You ever see in nice parts of town, you'll see these pretty landscape trees, and they'll have multiple stems, multiple trunks, like 3 or 4 or 5, and then a nice pretty canopy, and it looks beautiful. That is a tree that's been coppiced. So they let it grow up. It grows up as one stem, just like every other tree, and they'll grow up for a couple years, and they'll get maybe that big around, and then in the winter they'll cut it off. And then next spring, it'll send up a whole bunch of shoots. And they'll pick 3, 4, maybe 5, and they'll snip off the rest. They'll pick good ones, and they'll let those grow.
It's like crepe myrtles.
Yeah, crepe myrtles are often done that way. And you'll see those...
Wood tree.
No. But you'll see those multiple stems. That's what they look like.
Right.
And so if you were to take that crepe myrtle like that and cut it down to a stump every year,
Yeah, it would still be a
it would have a big, bushy, it'd turn into a big bush, is what it would.
So from the ground up, how high do they need to be? So like
2 to 4 inches. Just whatever your bush hog mowing deck is. Don't get caught up in details, just mow it over.
Now you plant these from seedlings or saplings?
You can plant them by seed. You can plant cuttings, hybrid poplar and hybrid willow. You can actually just take sticks and stick them in the ground in the winter. And then the next spring they'll root and grow a new tree.
green sticks.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes. So let's say we got y'all started doing that and y'all planted out, 200 white mulberry and 200 hybrid poplar and 200 hybrid willow. You let those hybrid poplar and hybrid willow grow for a year or two, and then you go in the winter. Every year you're cutting them down, but you'll let them grow and get established.
Wait 2 years.
Wait a couple years. You really want to just wait until they're about a broom handle.
They need to be spaced out in a specific area. Or not really?
It depends, but if you're doing this to propagate, to make new plants, and just new plants, and you're going to mow it every winter, then I'd put them, every 2 feet or so.
Fit in there and you'll be able to.
Yeah, and then maybe if you want to stack them in really tight, maybe every 4 feet, maybe 8 feet.
You've also got grass growing there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep, grass will grow in there as well.
It's a really good pasture.
And if you look out in the pasture, on the shade side of most of these trees, the grass will be greener because it can photosynthesize for longer because it's cooler. It'll be cooler. It's not baking in the sun, so it can actually make
the trees are companioning the
yes.
the grass.
So actually, what you'll end up with is if you plant these rows, you'll end up with thicker, richer grass in that area. It won't be, we plant the trees in there and they're going to cut our the amount of grass down by 50%, you'll actually have an increase in the amount of tonnage that you could take off of that.
So theoretically, would you do that to like, you were talking about you have like a 5 acre pasture or so that you would put the trees in. What would keep you from putting those trees in all of your pasture? Nothing. Just besides the work of putting them in.
Yeah. Now you don't want to feed super high protein all the time. I'm sure you've noticed in the springtime when all that lush new growth pops up, cattle will sometimes get scours, get diarrhea, because it's a massive bump up in protein. You don't want that. They actually need, a good amount of roughage, of fiber for their rumens to work properly. So you don't want to just have 30% protein all the time. That's not healthy for them.
Okay.
But what we do want to do is be able to supplement poorer parts of the year with higher protein. And so we can moderate that. So we're not having this high protein and then almost no protein. We want to stretch that out a little bit and moderate it and make things a little bit smoother.
So if you had your ideal place, you might have your cows on a 21-day rotation in a pasture, and you would have portions of that pasture would have the fodder trees to give them a boost in protein.
Or I might have a laneway. I might have a laneway going through several paddocks, or an area where I could just put a temporary paddock in and just let them kind of strip graze when I needed it. And I could just open that up and let them in there for an afternoon, so they're not always hammering it. Because you see, they'll eat all the leaves up as high as they can reach. So if they always have access to it, they'll just kill it.
Yeah.
They'll kill it and it'll just turn into pasture again.
Right.
So we don't want them to always have access to it. You want to be able to control that. So ideally, I would have a laneway, and I would be able to let them in there to supplement their protein needs as I see that they need it. So let's say it's getting a little bit drier, and I know that the protein content has gone down in my pasture. Just by looking at it, I can tell, hey, that's lower. Then maybe I start opening up those paddocks, and then we bump up their protein. If I'm looking at that and saying, yeah, I need to put some range tubs out there for extra protein and extra sugar, well, instead of buying those tubs and sitting them out there, how about we just open up this paddock and let them in there to get some 30% protein or 20% protein leaf matter and bump that up a little bit.
All right. Well, Nick has been going for an hour. Let's give him a little bit of break, and maybe we'll go outside.
A little water?
Yeah, I'm going to go get my water. I normally talk myself hoarse on these.